very good evening to everybody present here on the dais, esteemed guests and industry colleagues. This is my first time at AAERI Nepal's event, and I must say I am so glad to be here because there are quite a few events that happen at quite a few hotels in and around town. But to be here and still be an event that is engaging, but also has some grit to it. We're not afraid to have some practical conversations, some reasonable questions asked and answered while maintaining decorum and a wonderful environment around is really good to see. I understand I have a little less than 10 minutes with you here today, so I'd like to take this opportunity, perhaps by beginning, since it is my first time at an AAERI Nepal event and perhaps my first time meeting some of the industry colleagues as well, by sharing that when I went to Australia this time, 2024 March, it was exactly 10 years ago that I'd stepped into Sydney as a very nervous 18-year-old. I was one of those students that had to wait for her 18th birthday because guardianship documents was just a lot of documentation to create. So I waited for my 18th birthday, got that extension letter, and appeared in Australia, landed in Australia the last day that I possibly could, missed my orientation, and sort of fumbled through on week 3. As I look back, having spent 5 years in Australia, having completed my Bachelor's of Commerce with an accounting major, believe it or not, from ACU, and the 2 years that I spent after, I could not be more grateful for the time there that has had a significant contribution in forming me as the person that I am today. I'm here, I do wear a few hats, I'm very blessed to wear a few hats. Today, to be here in the capacity of the regional manager for ACU, it feels like I'm on the other side of the counter. From being, as I said, a nervous 17-year-old, going with my parents to different education fairs. The one thing I apologized to my hiring manager as soon as I got the job is I'm so sorry for asking the most obvious questions that have the answers all on the website on you in the fair, because I'm sure you felt like you were saying the same thing, and I'm sure you wanted to say it's on the website. What is the fees? What is the IELTS requirement? When are the starting dates? So I acknowledge and I thanked her and I apologized for having done that. And now on the other side of the counter, it feels a real honor and a privilege to be here, answering, addressing student concerns and engaging with students. Of the many hats that I wear, because of the Miss Nepal hat as well, I'm sure you must think as well that it's a little bit of a concern, as my industry colleague also shared earlier, that how do you feel being part of a team that encourages Nepali youth to leave the country? To that, I say that globalization, as cliched as it sounds, I think cliches translate to kisapita in Nepali. And there is a reason why the same thing is said over and over again, because there's probably some truth in it, is that globalization is inevitable. If we're trying to stop students from going by curbing their right to go and explore, that's really not going to address or not going to provide the solution that we ultimately want, which is capable Nepali youth that contributes to Nepal. That's the big picture. As a provider, on behalf of ACU, I'd like to share that in this very interesting arena of international education, we all play a very unique role as counselors, as education agencies, as providers, as the Australian government, as the Nepali government, and sometimes even various departments within the Nepali government, right? The Ministry of Education might want something, there's the finance department that might want something a little bit differently, but it's all aligned towards a common goal, again, towards building capable Nepali youth that is not just educated, empowered, engaged, has enough exposure, but also has the grit to work as hard as our country requires right now. In one such platform, I had the privilege of sharing a panel with the Vice Chancellor of Kathmandu University recently, and I'd shared something that I did not think would gain as much traction as it did. I'm not sure if somebody's watched that clip where I'd shared that today's Nepali youth, especially the Nepali youth, urban Nepali youth, should go out. Because as long as we have our black tea and our milk tea and our lunches and our dinners served to us, there's no way we can practically learn to become as hardworking as we need to be to build the country that we need to build. And while that got some positive and some negative remarks, I stand by it. That we need to create an environment that builds the robust, resilient, hardworking Nepali youth that the country definitely requires. And again, in doing so, we all play our role. As an education provider, on behalf of ACU particularly, the role that I see, and it is so good, can I just acknowledge my industry colleagues in the room as well, that I'm so inspired by the industry colleagues out here. It's my 4th year. I started in August 2020 in this capacity. I had worked in the finance department and international education advisory sector while I was studying in Australia as well. But being out here, based in Nepal, I think there is a very special and unique role that we play as well. Perhaps earlier we were thought of as representatives that sit on fairs, right? That sit and they give information about the university, that recruitment is the only goal. But as I see, not just the numbers, but the kind of engagement that as education providers that we do, it is really endearing to see. I'm glad to share that as ACU, we've had multiple regular engagement visits, and I think the largest was a very senior delegation that visited us in February this year, led by our Vice Chancellor, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, 3 executive deans, and the Director of Research, all here to want to engage and understand a community. I call it a community, don't like calling it a market so much. A community that contributes so significantly to not just us as an institution, but as a country. So I think that is really endearing to see. And I would encourage, I know that so many of my industry colleagues, as I mentioned, I see Subi's posts of doing so much engagement, not just in Nepal, but all of South Asia, and more, and beyond. So it is really good to see institutions engage with Nepal, and we have to be the sort of the middle people telling our institutions, right? Like, let us engage more with our country, with our community. So it is really good to see that we are heading on that path as well. I'm also proud to say that as an ACU graduate myself, I think the approach that we take, and I see a lot of the market take, right from the agencies to a lot of the providers as well, is that we are all part of a complex and an interesting system, because we cannot deny that there are things to fix. There's unintended byproducts that are definitely happening. But rather than have a very defensive approach towards it, we have all come together to acknowledge what problems exist, what might be the unintended results of it. We acknowledge the good and also the areas of improvement that was so eloquently put forward by Maheshji earlier as well. So on part of the providers, I'd like to share that our vision should definitely be building Nepal as a sustainable community to continue to engage with. I shared something rather radical. Whenever I share some ideas and some counterparts, things such as, just to give you some examples, we're exploring to bring in Nepali nursing students to do their placements in Nepal and rural communities in Nepal, because why not? Teaching students to come to do that. And while it is a long and cumbersome process, it is worth it. Everything in our industry is long and cumbersome and difficult, but it's worth it at the end. And whenever I share these ideas of let us do things that are engaging with the Nepali community, quite often I'm told, oh, you're wearing a Miss Nepal hat right now, you're thinking of community donations and you're thinking of contributions. I definitely think, and I'm sure that my industry colleagues and our guests would definitely agree, that the approach we must take is a very dignified approach. It's not, we're not asking for handouts. As a community that contributes so strongly to Australia, I think it is high time that we engage in a very dignified and respectful manner, as our ambassador has exemplified, and many people have given that example. So I would urge and request more of our industry colleagues to explore pathways where we can engage with the Nepali community, engage with students, that leads to a win-win situation and a longer-term growth. Growing numbers, recruitment, the enrollments are the byproduct of the good work that we do. And I think that is one of the main reasons why in the 20 odd years that ACU has been active in Nepal, we've seen many ups and downs, right from being known as a nursing university and facing whatever restrictions that we've faced because of the lack of public health workers that Nepal itself is facing. Having maintained that growth, I think it is a testament that when you engage honestly in the growth of the community that gives you so much, good enrollments, sturdy growth will continue to happen. So these recommendations that on face value might appear to be, oh, you're thinking from a very social work point of view, that's not very an economic decision. I was having a conversation earlier that 75% of Nepali education is government schools. And yet, because of course there's the English language requirement, we continue to engage only with the private schools. I presented a radical idea that if we invest in developing the quality of education in rural areas as well, with combined efforts of the government, don't you think that it makes economic sense as well? And that idea was almost laughed at for being, too social worky, not economical. You're not thinking as from an economic point of view, from an institution. But I do think that if we are talking about, because it can't just keep being extractive, right? We've got to help the community grow so that we can all share the fruits of the growth that happens in the community. I think, and I do want to, I'm mindful of the time that I have as well. I wanted to acknowledge AAERI Nepal. Thank you, Tuyati and Moishi, for inviting me over as well. Is that it is so endearing to see so much collaboration happening in perhaps one of the most cutthroat industries to exist. It is really endearing to see. I also acknowledge all the counselors here. Every time I go into an agency office, I make it a point to share with counselors that you definitely don't have an easy job. I do not envy your job. Because you've got to be aware of everything that's happening in Nepal, in Australia, in the numerous institutions, as pointed out earlier, the difficulties of having different requirements in different institutions. You've got to pick up calls from students and parents and everybody at God knows what time. You've got to know people at the banks, you've got to know what's happening, you've got to know a lot. And when a student does get that visa grant, you get big thank yous and presents, but sometimes when the result is not favorable, you might receive some harsh comments as well. So I acknowledge that the job that you do, even if sometimes you don't get the credit for it, it's a really important job, and we thank you for doing what you do. As Shugayati mentioned, this is turning out to be a little bit of a farewell event for our ambassador. And along with the many things that everybody has said about you, Ambassador, I wanted to take this opportunity as an aspiring woman leader, if I may say so myself. Thank you for being an example for something for us to be able to look up to. Representation matters. As I was walking down from Burj Khalifa, I'd gone to visit my sister, there's a photo, a poster on every floor of the people who contributed in making the Burj Khalifa. And as I walked down, I did not notice, I was counting the number of women that I saw in every poster. I did not know I was doing it. I was walking subconsciously. And as I walked down, as I came to the ground floor, I said, on average, there's like 2 to 3 women in the team. And I said, wait, what did I do? Why did I do that? Because you see someone like you out there and it gives you that belief that it is possible. As amazing as my male industry colleagues are, it's undeniable that many a times it is very much a gender, I wouldn't say biased, but there's gender heaviness in one sort. So it's really good to see that feminist leadership. So thank you for maintaining that energy and aura of kindness and strength, and for inspiring a generation of not just young women, young men as well, but a little more for the young women. So thank you very much. Lastly, on behalf of ACU, on behalf of Australian alumni as well, I've got to join that association. That's on my to-do list this year. And as a person who's been on sort of both sides now of the Australian education sector, and as a person who is deeply concerned and connected with the growth of Nepal as a whole, I thank you for doing all that you do. And I'd like to encourage us all to do our part in thinking the longer term picture, which is and always should be centered at developing the Nepali youth to be a contributing strong member of the society. Thank you for this platform. Thank you for your time. Have a great rest of the day.